professional guitar repairman for the last 10 years, the last 4 of which I spent working at the legendary Gruen Guitars. I'm privileged to work alongside 7 of the country's best stringed instrument repairmen. Through the years, I've learned that most guitars have the capability of becoming decent playing instruments. With the right adjustments in the right places, any guitar can improve in sound and playability. I believe that the better your guitar is set up, the more you're likely to play and practice with it, and the better you will sound as a musician as a result. That's why I love doing what I do. When I first got started in the business some 10 years ago, the only thing I knew about guitars was that they were hard to play. Playing in bands in New York, I was always in need of repairs on my guitars. I was having a setup done every couple of months, and playing the guitar turned into an expensive habit. I wanted to save some money by learning to fix my own guitars. So I got a job in a music store and started learning from the in-house repairman. In no time, I was repairing alongside a real pro. My energy was no longer in playing, but in repairing, combining my 2 favorite hobbies, woodworking and guitars. After about 5 years, my wife and I decided to take a vacation. I decided this would be a perfect time to build a boat and put it in the water somewhere far from New York. When I finished making the boat, we put it on top of the Jeep and headed south. We had big plans of fishing and good times in New Orleans and everywhere along the way, except we never made it. The Jeep broke down about 40 miles from Nashville, so we decided that while the car was being fixed, Nashville was our vacation destination. The car was ready in about 3 or 4 days, but by then we knew that we both loved Nashville. It wasn't a coincidence that my faulty car would stop me at the front door of the world's most famous guitar shop. I was destined to be in Nashville, and a few months later, I started working in the repair shop of Gruen Guitars. I'm here to teach you what you need to know about setting up your guitar in your own home. I'm going to share some of the skills and knowledge I've picked up through the years. I'll show you the proper way to restring your guitar, how to adjust the neck and action from the bridge to the saddles, and the fundamentals of intonation. You'll learn how to make basic adjustments to your guitar so you'll have a better playing and sounding instrument. I'll also teach you how to properly clean and restring the guitar. I suggest that every student watch the first lesson of this course, whether you have an acoustic or an electric guitar. In that lesson, I'll be teaching you about the parts of the guitar, the tools you will need for a setup, and other important information about guitar setups. Then, if you have an electric guitar, go on to lesson 2. If you have an acoustic guitar, skip lesson 2 and watch lesson 3. When you're finished, you'll have a guitar you look forward to playing every day. I've chosen the most common guitars to use as examples in these lessons. I'll show you how to set up a Gibson Les Paul, a Fender Stratocaster, an archtop acoustic guitar, and a flat top acoustic guitar. If your guitar is not one that I've listed, that's okay. The concepts and steps to the setups will most likely apply to your guitar too. We at Legacy are offering a unique opportunity as well. If you would like me to personally set up your guitar, or think you might be in need of more in-depth work, visit learnandmaster.com/guitar services for more information about how to send your guitar to me. I will personally examine the instrument and give you my professional opinion. My focus is bringing out the best in every instrument, while keeping in mind whether or not the repairs are cost-effective to the value of the piece. I wish you all the best as you learn to play the guitar, and I'm here to show you how to have a great sounding instrument. All you need to do is learn the basics of setting up your guitar. Let's get started.
First, I was collecting guitars beginning when I was a college student. I found that I had an addiction for the things. I had no intention of starting a business, but what I found is that having an addiction meant that the moment I woke up, I'd immediately scan the newspaper classified ads, because there certainly was no internet to check back then. I'd check the bulletin boards at school to see if anybody was advertising something. There were half a dozen pawn shops in walking distance, because the University of Chicago on the south side is right, not exactly in the wealthiest part of town. There's walking distance on either side of it that you can start hitting the hock shops. And there was one music store that specialized in vintage instruments. Well, they didn't call them vintage, they called them used. But the fret shop at Harper Court, which was walking distance half a mile, but still I could walk half a mile then and still can. I'd check all of that stuff, and I found that for every one that I'd find that I really truly wanted for my own collection, I'd come across 50 or even 100 that were terrific deals on things I didn't want. But if I saw something for $50 where I knew I could sell it for $150 by the end of the week, I'd buy that. And Mom and Dad were willing to spring for one good guitar, after which I was on my own. But every month, at the beginning of the month, they gave me money for apartment rent and food and books and whatever. I blew it all on guitars, every penny of it. And by the end of the week, I'd have all the money they gave me back, plus I'd have guitars left over. So I could keep some. I did start a collection. And gradually I found that this byproduct, which I originally viewed as a nuisance, but it was there, and I can't just turn it away if it's $50 and I know where I can get $150 for it, besides it's going to support the ones I want to keep. Eventually they got to be a surplus, but so it started out I'd have a wall of guitars, and then I had my second year in graduate school I had a room of guitars. So one day I got a call from Hank Williams Jr. I was doing graduate work at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville at that point. Undergrad was University of Chicago. First year of graduate school was at Duke. And I switched to University of Tennessee, but that was partly because there was a professor there that I knew from the time that I was an undergraduate at University of Chicago and he was a graduate student. Anyway, when I was at the University of Tennessee, one day at my apartment, I got a call which basically went to the effect of, "Hello, this is Hank Williams Jr. Sonny Osborne from the Opry told me that you have a bunch of Martins and I'm collecting them." He did end up doing some trading with me, and he got, I think, 3 guitars, which is about as much as that car would haul to take back. Jaguar E's are not noted for hauling capacity. And he said he could be back the next day with a bigger car. And he did come back the next day with a Cadillac Eldorado, and he bought as much as that would haul, and I had plenty left. I wasn't selling him my very best, because I had a pretty sharp line of demarcation between the keepers and those that are for sale. But he said that Nashville didn't have anybody like me, and if I ever wanted to, he could have an apartment waiting for me, and he'd help me get started in business. And when this was getting close to the end of the semester, and I was somewhat disillusioned with the academic scene and was beginning to realize that a specialty of feeding behavior of pit vipers might not actually pay well. If you have a rattlesnake that won't eat, I can help, but as a career move, snakes as paying clients don't pay you, and there's not a lot of private work available in reptilian behavior. I can set up a business and discuss reptilian behavior of customers or whatever, but I like snakes still. That's why I got 13 of them plus the 3 lizards in my office. But at any rate, I called Hank up, and he didn't there was an apartment waiting for me. He did not help me to get established in business, which is probably a good thing. And as it is, Hank and I are still on good speaking terms, which we probably would not have been had we gone into business together, because we both have too strong a personality and too much independence. It wouldn't have been a good partnership. But he did get me to Nashville. He did help me get started in terms of, he didn't pay my apartment rent, but he found an apartment, had it ready. And after that, I was on my own, but he did help support me for the first couple of years by buying enough that he was one of my very best customers. I used to go over to his house at least 3 times a week back then. And so it was something good. And it did get me to Nashville. And that is, to a large extent, how I got started. I did have a business partner after being in Nashville for a year. I got into a partnership with a fellow named Tut Taylor, who now lives in North Carolina, and I think is about 85 years old now. But that was 40 years ago that we opened up the shop. And he was my partner for the first 9 months. And we had one employee named Randy Wood, and the original name of the shop was GTR Incorporated. That's a good abbreviation for guitar, but it was also George, Tut, and Randy. And he was my partner, Tut, for the first 9 months until September of the year 1970. One day I just came in and there was a note on the inside door going to the back room. It said, George. And it had a picture of a rattlesnake he'd drawn on the outside of the envelope. I opened it. I've decided to sell my share of the business to you. Call your father and get $10,000 and we'll discuss how to do everything from there. Well, it's sort of like in the Monopoly game, advance 4 steps. And I couldn't just call Daddy and get $10,000. And besides, $10,000 now, that's not a lot to help buy out a business. But in 1970, $10,000 was more like the equivalent of $100,000 today. In fact, some of the instruments that I used to sell for $400 in 1970 today would be $50,000. And at any rate, $10,000 was a lot. I couldn't just ask Daddy and Mommy for that. But we did get things worked out. And he had 8 kids to feed, whereas I had me and a few snakes to feed. So he went on to do other things. And we still parted as friends. We're still friends, so that worked out. I don't have any ex-partners who are enemies. In fact, I only have one ex-partner because that's the only partner I ever had, and it only lasted for 9 months. But that's what got me to Nashville. I was interested in them before I really started to play. I have a brother 3.5 years younger than me who was playing before I did, but I had friends in high school and later in college who were very into the music. Plus I had a girlfriend who was interested in it. That also helps. But I found that I could approach them in almost exactly the same way that I would zoological specimens, which I've been collecting snakes since I was 8 years old. When I was 12, I was subscribing to Copia, the Journal of the American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists. I was probably one of the few who didn't have a graduate degree who was trying to read that, but I was reading it and understanding it. And you can approach the instruments in virtually the same way that you'd study reptiles and amphibians or mammals or birds, but reptiles were my main interest, and with the reptiles, they don't have fur or feathers to obscure the anatomy. You can see what's going on. And with the guitars and banjos and mandolins, it's a bit similar. You can actually look at them and sort of see how they're put together, what makes them special. And even now, the books that I've done are organized very much like zoological field guides. And in my mind, I can organize these things in a Linnaean taxonomic system just the way zoological specimens or botanical specimens are. And I was interested in them as pieces of history, but also instruments that seem almost alive. They have soul and personality. That's what really puts the good ones in a separate category from the mundane and from the mass-produced. The really great instruments truly do have soul. They just exude that. And when you pick one up and play it, it has a totally different feel from the mass-produced item. But you can look at it in terms of comparing almost to a car. I mean, for somebody who doesn't play, they do understand that you can look at a car, but it doesn't tell you how it performs. If you can see it parked somewhere, or even to see it driven around a track, or if you're driving on the interstate and somebody in a Ferrari or a Lamborghini is driving next to you, you really can't tell that much. It looks different, but you can't tell what it can do really until it roars away from you, except that if you're obeying the speed limit, it doesn't do that. So if you get a ride where it's in a sedan, where some expensive sport car like a nice BMW or Mercedes, and you just get a ride and you're sitting in the back seat, that's not the same as sitting in the passenger seat, but you don't ever really get the feel until you get behind the wheel. It's only when you drive it yourself that you can truly tell the difference, and you can tell the good ones feel absolutely alive. They have soul and personality, and they don't simply do exactly as they're told. When they have personality, it means they start suggesting things to you that you might not have thought of otherwise. And the great ones inspire you to do things that truly you might not otherwise have ever thought of. There are instruments that are physically very easy to play, but are boring. And those, we still have some things like that. Lots of session players like things that just are meek and mild and do as they're told. But if they do everything equally well, it usually means they don't do anything superbly well. And they don't have much soul. But that can work on stage for pre-rehearsed material. It may not be so great for creative writing. It may not create the next big new style or big hit, but once you've got it down, you can do it on the boring one. But it is sort of like driving a 2-year-old Lincoln Town Car versus a really nice high-end Mercedes or BMW. But with cars, every mile you drive them, they're worth less. With the guitar, you can play that same guitar for your entire lifetime, and if you take good care of it, it'll still outlast your great-grandchildren. So you can actually use it, you can enjoy it as a utility tool, you can enjoy it as something that's creative, you can enjoy it as a great piece of art. They look good, they feel good, they sound good. If you hand that same guitar to 10 different musicians, if it's a really great one, it may speak to each one of them in a different way because no two people have quite the same touch. But I can generally play a guitar and in the first minute know which of my customers are going to like it and why. And even if I can't play as well as some of those guys, I still know what it can do. It tells me pretty quick. And I know who to call. When I started out collecting, which was around 63, there was certainly no money in it. Some things which today are as much as $200,000, I remember when they were $100 used instruments, and I still liked them then. So I don't like them anymore because they're more money. In fact, it makes them less affordable for me. Some of the things that I used to be able to collect and keep now are so expensive that if I have one guitar that costs as much or more than I paid for my house, I really can't afford to keep them the way I once used to. So my personal collection is not what it once was. But I still have this room full of them that are mine, and I have my office, which is bigger than this room, but is filled more with my snakes and lizards, my parrot and me. Not much in the way of instruments in there, but the beasties and me have the office at the end, right that way. And at home I got the cats. I have more cats than I have instruments at home. I don't keep a lot of instruments at home. I'll typically take an instrument home almost every night, but I take whichever one I'm in the mood to take home that night to play. Well, really, each of these makers, Martin, Fender, Gibson, had certain golden era periods, sometimes more than one, actually. For example, with Gibson, their best mandolins were from about 1910 through the late 1920s, but their absolute peak was really from about mid-1922 through the end of 1924, a very short time. And they made their finest mandolins ever. But for their banjos, their best banjos were from about 1933 through 1940. But their best electric guitars were from about 1950 through 1960. For Martin, I'd say that their finest guitars were from 1929 through 38. So each company can have its own particular period. Like the Fender Guitar Company, really their best stuff is 50 up through about 63. So again, a fairly short time period, but each particular maker can have a different golden era. Like a hand builder like D'Angelico was in business from 1932 through, he died in 64. All of his stuff was good, but if he had a really, really great golden era, it was probably about 37 up until right when he died. And his apprentice, D'Acquisto, was in business from 65, right after D'Angelico died, through his own death, which was in 1995. And his greatest instruments were toward his end. But with an individual hand builder, often enough their best are their last ones. They're more experienced. A company like Martin, when they hit their golden era period, had already been around a long time. The Martin was founded in 1833, so that by 1935, they'd already been in business for 102 years. So they'd had a chance to get things right, but an individual hand builder, you'd expect to be better at age 65 than he was at age 25. In fact, if he isn't better at 65, it means he either no longer gives a damn, or he's beginning to get senile, or he's so arthritic he can't do it anymore. But he should have learned as he went along. So that, of course, even with some great writers and painters, sometimes they don't do as well in their later years. But with a craftsman, it's a bit different. They tend seldom to just lose it. Artists and writers sometimes create their best work before they're 35 years old and then burn out. But that's a rare thing with hand craftsmen building instruments. They tend to just get better as they go along. Stradivari lived to be age 93, which was highly unusual because he died in 1737, and in those days not very many people were going to live to age 93. There was no modern medicine back then, no antibiotics for sure, no surgery. If you got pneumonia, you just died, and now you take a few pills and you be better. Not back then, but he still lived to be 93. And the interesting thing is the instruments he was doing in his very last years, while they were not quite as neat and clean on the craftsmanship because his hand was getting a bit shaky, they sounded about as good as they ever did, and they were still amazingly good. But his peak was probably when he was maybe 75 years old. And his instruments after that were not garbage by any means. But I don't think he really improved after about 75. But there's plenty of creative writers and artists you can look, and even some musicians that, you know, they can do some of their finest work before they're 35 and then they just burn out. Some like Hank Williams Sr. only lived to be 29. And Hank, and you can name a lot of great musicians who didn't even make it to 30 and still created and did great work. But doing instrument building or repair is something that really does take quite a few years to get good at, and you tend not to lose it. which also is good in that it requires not only a lot of training, but basically pretty simple type hand tools, such that probably 98 to 99% of the work that people like Greg do use hand tools that Stradivari or Guarneri would recognize, and that they could even, if gone back in the time machine, they could step right into one of those shops and pick up most of the tools and know how to use them. And if you are good at guitar repair, it's not likely to be mechanized. It's not likely to become obsolete. It's a craft where if you learn this and get good at it, you have a job skill that is good for a lifetime. Today, there are numerous jobs, like if you were really terrific developing color film prints, lots of luck. Everybody's digital now. And there's a few people doing old, but as far as Kodacolor, I don't even know you can buy that film anymore. Black and white photography is, again, an almost lost art. There's a few professionals doing it, but so far as even going down to the neighborhood drugstore to get your film developed, no, that's not the way it's done much anymore. Or even with computers, it's certainly true that if you're a good computer programmer, that you can find work, but you'd better stay current because everything that you know will be obsolete within 5 years or less. Whereas if you learn guitar repair, nothing you learn goes obsolete in your lifetime. We're still working on guitars that can be 75 years old or more. And the interesting thing is Martin has not had a significant design innovation in 75 years. Since the end of 34, there's really nothing that's come along in the way of Martin guitar design that's changed for the better. And even with electric guitars, where you'd think that there's a lot of innovation going on, the answer is no, there isn't. The 1959 Gibson Sunburst Les Paul has all the bells and whistles of the new one. The old one was better built. The new one may be built primarily with CNC, computer numeric controlled equipment, which they certainly didn't have in 59, but that doesn't make it better. It makes it easier to mass produce it today. But they're building the same design with the same specs, and the wiring diagram is the same. The quality of the pickups has not really, the quality is actually not as good as it was in 59, but back then they were handmade, and now there's more mechanization, but the design of the pickup is exactly the same. It hasn't evolved one bit. Even the best guitar amps still have tubes. And at this point, there's not any tube makers left in the U.S., so that means they're using Russian and Chinese tubes, because the Russians never did go to solid state. They stayed with tube technology for all of their military stuff right up to the end of the Soviet Union. So they still had tube manufacturers there. And since they didn't respect American patents, they copied RCA tubes, which means that the tubes interchange in our amplifiers, which is a good thing, because RCA quit making tubes years ago. We are always interested in hiring people who are talented and sincerely interested. There is a bottleneck in this business in the repair department. It takes me 5 minutes to an hour to buy one that can take 50 or 100 hours to repair. We have a backlog of 700 and some instruments sitting upstairs that are unsaleable until they're fixed. This means that I have an insatiable need for more repair people, but I don't have infinite space to put them. I think he's a very talented craftsman, and he's doing a lot more for us now than he used to. I don't generally assign the work upstairs. Eric does, and Eric is the shop manager. But I know that Greg is getting a wider variety of tasks, and I think that he's doing a sufficiently wide variety that at this point we can say that he's able to do major structural and cosmetic as well as setup work. We are fortunate after having been in business for almost 40 years, people come to us and we can pick and choose, but it's something we do with considerable care because it is a long-term commitment to training people. Because even if they come in quite good, we haven't had anybody who came in who didn't learn while they were here. There's more on-the-job training. Some of that, I can't claim I teach everybody everything either, but they have the opportunity to learn from each other, and also just from sitting there and communing with the right instruments. You look at them, you hold them, you commune with them, you can see how they're put together, and you can learn by looking. And I want to hire people who have that ability, that when you hand them something that's really good, they can recognize what it is, what is going on, what makes it so special, what gives it its soul and personality. If they can't do that, then they don't need to be working here at all, because there are some things that I can't teach. It's a rare event to find a 1935 Martin or Gibson guitar that doesn't have problems like worn frets, bad neck set angle, loose glue seams, sometimes cracks, that need attention. Now obviously we don't want to just simply buy basket cases that aren't going to be good when they're done, but even the very best of them usually need some setup work. Like neck set angle is something that on a guitar that's over 40 years old, it would be the exception to the rule that it would not need a neck set, because just with a set of light gauge acoustic strings, you've got a bit over 200 pounds of pressure. It's like putting braces on a kid's teeth, Crank it up to 200 pounds of pressure, leave it there for 60 years, something's gonna move. And the guys upstairs have the job to fix that. And in order to play these things, they do need maintenance. Just like with violins, people are still playing violins made by great makers like Stradivari and Guarneri and Amati, Stainer, whatever. But these things were made, the violins, from the mid-1500s right on up into the mid-1700s. By now, they've all needed work. Without great craftsmen to repair them as well as to have built them in the first place, we wouldn't have any of these vintage instruments to play, and as a dealer I wouldn't have any of them to sell. So that's perhaps the long-winded answer of why do I need these guys? Without them, this business is dead. I can't function without them. We do a wide variety of different type tasks upstairs. Most shops, when they talk about repair, it's really almost a misnomer. What they're really doing is just setup work. They may adjust a truss rod or address frets. They might re-glue a loose bridge, but they also spend a lot of time doing customizing, which we don't view as repair. We view that in many ways is equivalent to tattooing minor-age children. We don't do that here. We try to stay within the maker's original design, and we feel that modifying instruments from that design is detrimental to preserving the historical integrity of the instrument, but also it reduces monetary value. You can spend good money screwing up your instrument royally, but if you have an electric guitar and you don't like the sound of the pickups, even if you could buy new pickups that might sound better to your ear, that guitar is going to be worth probably half as much when you get done modifying it, and you will have spent good money to reduce its value by 50%. If you don't like the way something sounds due to its specifications rather than the fact that it needed setup work, then perhaps you should trade it or sell it and get something else, but don't modify it. So we work on good instruments upstairs, and if we fix a guitar, first we don't start on one that we don't know what it is and how well it'll turn out. We don't buy things that are unrepairable. But we have our own standards of how we expect it to be. Our standards are high, but if we hang it on the wall and we're happy with it and somebody comes in and doesn't like it, we're not obligated to please them. They don't have to buy that one. They can buy another one. They can go elsewhere if they want to. But we're not obligated to please them. If the public brings in an instrument of their own and wants it repaired, they not only want to bargain the price down, but they also feel that the craftsman doing the work is obligated to please them. They may have standards that are impossible to please. They may have unrealistic expectations, but somehow you're supposed to work and work and work until they're pleased. Some people can't be pleased. I'd rather not try. The one that they have to please in this business is me. I have standards that are attainable. I don't ask for the impossible. I have a pretty good idea what can and can't be done. And you get the satisfaction of working on things that are really good and learning as you go. We got a fair number of guitars here, but one of the ones that I really particularly like is right up here. This is a 1928 L5, very pretty curly maple back. It happens to be exactly like the one that Maybelle Carter played. And she played with a thumb pick and finger pick, and somewhere in my pocket here I've got thumb pick and finger pick. Much a favorite guitar of mine as I have got. I have certainly banjos that I like I like playing banjo and mandolin. So my style of playing is completely different on banjo than it would be on guitar. But what I was playing is sort of a medley of Carter family tunes there, and done pretty much in the style that Maybelle would do it, or would have done it. She's dead now, so she can't do it today. But if I had to pick my all-time favorite guitar player, it would be her.
Which you'll use throughout the setup, and about the tools you'll use when setting up your guitar. You're welcome to skip this lesson if you feel like you know all the information, but it won't hurt you to refresh your memory, and you might learn something new. First, let's talk about what a guitar setup is and why you need one. A setup is the correct adjustment of a guitar's mechanical components. A setup includes taking off the old strings and replacing them with new ones. You'll clean and polish the fingerboard and frets, as well as the body. You'll tighten the tuning keys and pots if you're playing an electric guitar. Then, you'll make adjustments to the neck, bridge, saddles, nut height, pickup height, and intonation as necessary. The setups will vary slightly depending on the type of guitar you have, but we'll get into the specifics in the next couple of lessons. Many of the parts on your guitar are made adjustable for a reason. Most guitars are made of wood, and the parts of the guitar will move given weather conditions, time, or string preference. Periodic adjustments have to be made to keep your guitar at optimum playability. On some guitars, you may have to make further changes that are more complicated than a general setup. These alterations will have to be made with specialty or modified tools and are to be very exact. If you come across any problems that I don't cover in the setup lessons, have your guitar looked at by a professional. Now, if you don't do a periodic setup on your guitar, it will gradually play worse and worse. The movements can be subtle and you might not feel them at first. It's usually when the guitar is at its worst that it makes it on my bench for a setup, or even worse, you stop playing it. You might be asking at this point, how many times a year should I set my guitar up? How often you need a setup will vary. In most cases, you'll want to make adjustments after the 2 major season changes, depending on where you live. Just keep in mind that your guitar is most comfortable between 45 and 55% humidity. How often you set up your guitar will also depend on how much you play it and how well you care for it. The more you play it, the more often you'll want to make adjustments. Also, keeping it away from heat vents and in fairly constant temperature will keep your guitar in good condition and minimize the number of adjustments you'll need to make. Before we begin setting up electric guitars, it's good to know the different parts of the guitar. If you have an acoustic guitar, you can skip this section and go on to the next one on parts of the acoustic guitar. Most electric guitars are made up of a neck and a body. At the top of the neck is the peghead. The peghead, also known as the headstock, is the top piece of the guitar where you'll find the tuning keys, the nut, and possibly have access to the truss rod. Sometimes you'll hear tuning keys called tuning pegs, and they could also be called tuners. but I'll be calling them tuning keys throughout the rest of this course. Now, the tuning key is used to tune the guitar. By turning the tuning key, you will tighten or loosen the string, making the note sharp or flat. Okay. The nut is one of 2 points that the string rests on for support. The other is the saddle. We'll get to the saddle in a minute. The nut has a specific job of spacing the strings and setting their height. This height and spacing should be fixed and not adjusted. The adjustment of the nut slot should not be required for a routine setup unless it was not properly made or a heavier string gauge is desired for the new setup. Opening the slot to accept heavier strings is important, and failure to do so can break or crack the nut. The adjustment of the nut is not based on preference like the action, and I don't recommend you make adjustments to it. Have a professional look at it if you think your nut needs to be adjusted. Right here is the fingerboard or the fretboard where you'll find the frets. Under the fingerboard is a channel that houses an adjustable truss rod. Adjusting the truss rod will add or take away relief from the neck. An adjustable truss rod is present on most electric guitars and will allow the guitar to accept a wide variety of string gauges. The rod will have to be periodically adjusted to accommodate for seasonal changes as well. Going back to relief. What is relief? When sighting down your guitar neck, it should have a certain amount of up bow. That up bow is called relief. That takes care of the neck. Let's talk about the body of the guitar for a minute. On the body, you'll find the bridge, the saddles, tailpiece, and the electronics, usually consisting of pickups, pots, an output jack, and a switch. You'll also find a pickguard on some guitars. Its main purpose is to protect the guitar's finish from being scratched by the guitar pick. Okay. The bridge will vary from guitar to guitar. The purpose of the bridge is usually to support the saddles. The bridge and saddles go hand in hand. The saddle is the one of 2 points that the string rests on. The other is the nut. The saddle and/or bridge, unlike the nut, have the ability to move up or down to suit a player's preference for action. It usually has the ability to move forward or backward as well for the purposes of intonation. So let's talk about action and intonation. The action is the distance between the strings and the frets. Most people prefer to have their action low for ease of playability, but that is based directly on fretwork, which refers to the correct installation and leveling of the frets. Intonation is the term used to describe the accuracy of the sound of the notes that repeat throughout the neck on varying strings. To accommodate for the varying sizes of strings and the action, the intonation has to be adjusted to elongate or shorten the scale length. Moving the saddle towards the nut will shorten the scale length and make the notes sharp. Moving it further away will elongate the scale length and making the note flat. The tailpiece is located at the base of the guitar and is where the strings are secured. Not all guitars have a tailpiece. Some strings are secured through the body of the guitar. A Gibson Les Paul will have one, but a Fender Stratocaster will not. Finally, the electronics on your electric guitar will consist of pickups, switch, pots, and an output jack. Most electric guitars will come with 1, 2, or 3 pickups. Pickups are fixed to the body and sit underneath the strings. They are adjustable so that you can move them closer or further away from the vibrating strings. Pickups enable the player to electrify the strings, sending the signal through an amplifier for greater sound. Switches are most common in a 3-way or a 5-way. This switch will allow the player to change from one pickup to the other or various combinations. The pot is short for potentiometer and is controlled by a knob or knobs at the top of the guitar. The pot or pots are connected to the pickups and will control the volume and the tone for the pickup. The output jack is where the connection between the guitar and the amplifier's input jack is made. Okay. I've pointed out all the parts of the electric guitar and some basic terms you'll hear me reference as we set up your guitar. If you don't have an acoustic guitar, you can skip the next section. Before we begin setting up acoustic guitars, it's good to know the different parts of the guitar. So, let's talk about the main parts of the acoustic guitar and some basic terms I'll use when setting up the guitar. All guitars are made up of a neck and a body. At the top of the neck is the peg head. The peg head, also known as the headstock, is the top piece of the guitar where you'll find the tuning keys, the nut, and possibly access the truss rod. Sometimes you'll hear tuning keys called tuning pegs, and they could also be called tuners. But I'll be calling them tuning keys throughout the rest of the course. Now the tuning key is used to tune the guitar. By turning the tuning keys, you will tighten or loosen the string, making the note more sharp or flat. Okay. The nut is one of 2 points that the string rests on. The other is the saddle. We'll get to the saddle in a minute. The nut has a specific job of spacing the strings and setting their height. This height and spacing should be fixed and not adjusted. The adjustment of the nut slot should not be required for a routine setup unless it was not properly made or a heavier string gauge is desired for the new setup. Opening the slot to accept the heavier string is important, and failure to do so can break or crack the nut. The adjustment of the nut is not based on preference like the action, and I don't recommend you make adjustments to it. Have a professional look at it if you think your nut needs to be adjusted. Right here is the fingerboard or fretboard where you'll find the frets. Under the fingerboard is a channel in the neck that houses the truss rod. An adjustable truss rod is present on most modern acoustic guitars. Adjusting the truss rod will add or take away relief from the neck. The adjustable truss rod will allow the guitar to accept a wide variety of string gauges. The rod will also have to periodically be adjusted to accommodate for seasonal changes. Now, what is relief? When setting your guitar neck, it should have a certain amount of up bow. That up bow is called relief. That takes care of the neck and the peg head. Let's talk about the body of the guitar for a minute. Now, the body of an acoustic guitar consists of the top, the back, and the sides. The top has a sound hole, a bridge, and a saddle. You'll also find a pick guard on the top. Its main purpose is to protect the guitar's finish from being scratched by the guitar pick. You might also find a strap button and an end pin, in this case, an output jack. Right here is the bridge. The purpose of the bridge is to support the saddle and hold the bridge pins. The bridge pins hold the strings in place by their ball ends. The saddle is the other one of the 2 points that the string rests on. The saddle, unlike the nut, has the ability to move up or down to suit a player's preference of action. A flat top will have a bridge fixed in place, and all the adjusting of the action and intonation will be done on the saddle. An arch top will usually have an adjustable bridge called a floating bridge. Let's talk about action and intonation. The action is the distance between the strings and the frets. Most people prefer to have their action low for ease of playability, but that is based directly on the fretwork, which refers to the correct installation and leveling of the frets. Intonation is the term used to describe the accuracy of the sound of the notes that repeat throughout the neck on varying strings. To accommodate for varying sizes of strings in action, acoustic flat-top guitars have a bridge and saddle that complements the scale length and is compensated for intonation. Okay, I've pointed out all the parts of the acoustic guitar and some basic terms you'll hear me reference as we set up your guitar. In order to perform a setup, you'll need an assortment of tools and materials. Most of these tools or materials you might already own, and your local music store will have a peg winder and guitar polish. Here's what you'll need. You'll need an electric tuner. More than likely your tuner has a needle or a succession of lights that when the needle is in the middle, the string is tuned. My tuner is a strobe tuner and works a little bit different, but the idea is the same. You'll need the correct truss rod tool. Your guitar's manufacturer should supply this tool. You'll need a 3 or a 6-inch ruler with 30 seconds and 64th increments. You can find this ruler at a home improvement store. You'll need precision Phillips and flathead screwdrivers. Diagonal cutters, string clippers. You'll need a fingerboard conditioner and 4-0 grade steel wool. Tuning peg winder. You'll be able to turn the tuning keys much faster when you use a peg winder. Allen keys, if needed. Some guitars use Allen keys during the setup and some don't, so check your particular guitar. You'll need guitar polish and a clean cloth. A small adjustable wrench for tightening some of the guitar's components. Pencil. You'll need sandpaper and a flat surface. A razor blade. You also might need some sort of shim stock. A veneer of maybe holly or maple. The cost of these tools and supplies are very inexpensive and they're easy to find. I suggest you gather these tools before beginning a setup on your guitar. Before we move on, I want to talk to you about string and string gauges for a minute. String gauges come in light, extra light, medium, and heavy. It's a good idea to keep the same gauge of the string that the factory set up on your guitar. As you probably know, there are a wide variety of gauges, but I recommend staying as close as possible to the factory strings. For Les Pauls and Strats, I recommend 10 to 46 for the best sound and the most comfort in playing. For flat tops and arch tops, I recommend a light or a medium set for the most volume. Alright, you know the different parts of the guitar, but before we move on to setting up your guitar, we need to talk about fretwork for a minute. If you set up your guitar as I instruct you in these lessons and you still encounter problems with the playability and sound, you may need to have some fretwork done on your guitar. Fretwork is the term describing the correct installation and leveling of frets. The fretwork will dictate the action and the overall playability of your guitar. If fret wear is present, you'll encounter fret buzz and or intonation problems. A fret dress will be required to remove light pitting or dents in the fret. The process of a fret dress includes the leveling of the frets and filing a new crown on the fret. The crown is the topmost part of the fret, and the average fret has enough height for 2 or 3 fret dresses, depending on how much they are maintained. If more serious wear is present, or the fingerboard has unevenness including twisting, kick-up, or the truss rod doesn't function properly, a complete refret will be necessary. The process of a refret includes the removal of frets, leveling of the fingerboard, and reinstallation of frets and polishing them out. Fretwork is key to a professional setup. If you have additional problems or you feel more comfortable in having a professional work on your guitar, we at Legacy are offering a unique opportunity. If you would like me personally to set up your guitar or think you might be in need of more in-depth work, visit learnandmaster.com/guitar services for more information about how to send your guitar to me. Let's get started with a Gibson Les Paul. The Gibson Les Paul made its debut in 1952. Famed musician Les Paul collaborated with Gibson, creating the most successful endorsement agreement in the history of fretted instruments. Okay, every guitar setup occurs in the same order. You'll begin with the maintenance and care. Take off the old strings, clean and condition the fingerboard, then clean and polish the body. After restringing the guitar, you'll make the necessary adjustments to the neck. Next, you'll make any adjustments to the bridge and the saddles, nut height, and finally adjust the pickup height and intonation if necessary. It's always in that order. There are different ways of adjusting individual guitars, but the order is always the same. So when beginning a setup for your Les Paul, here are the tools you will need. A tuner. I recommend a Peterson tuner for the best accuracy in tuning your guitar. It will work for an electric or an acoustic guitar. Fingerboard conditioner with steel wool. Guitar polish with a polishing cloth. Peg winder. Three or a 6-inch ruler with 30 seconds and 64th increments. A 5/16 hex tool, which should come with your guitar. Precision flathead screwdriver and a precision Phillips head screwdriver. Small adjustable wrench. And small diagonal cutters. To start a setup, we must first remove the old strings. To do that, you will select the strings from the tuning keys. Remember, these are the tuning keys right here. When the strings are completely slacked, you should clip them in the center. Be sure to hold both ends so they don't spring back and scratch your guitar. Then remove them from the tailpiece and the tuners on both ends of the guitar. Put the tailpiece aside along with the bridge. When you get the strings removed from the guitar, we'll start tightening all the components on the instrument. We'll start with the tuners and finish with the pots if needed. By tightening the components on the tuning keys, you'll avoid any unwanted vibration, and by tightening the components of the pots, you'll avoid any future electrical problems. Take the knobs off and tighten the pots if they're loose. When the guitar's components are tight and the strings are off, we'll tend to the fingerboard with the fingerboard conditioner and 4-0 grade steel wool. Take the steel wool, spread it around. You'll only use conditioning oil and steel wool on dark woods like ebony and rosewood. You'll spread the oil with the steel wool over the whole fingerboard. Be sure to clean in an up and down motion to finish. When you're finished cleaning and polishing the fingerboard, it's best to use a paper towel to clean the excess oil and the steel wool fibers. Be sure to wipe the fingerboard down thoroughly so no oil or fibers are left behind. Okay, next you will clean the guitar body with a good polish and a new clean cloth. You'll want to use a decent guitar polish in the $5 to $7 price range. Big Ben's is a great brand to use and I highly recommend their polish. The odds are the more you pay for a polish, the better quality it is. I'll clean the body now so you get the idea. When polishing the guitar, it's a good idea to go with the grain with the polishing cloth. Alright, in front of me sits a clean instrument free of debris. It is not ready for me to put strings on. String preference is important not only in gauge but also in brand. I've been using Diodarios for years and I highly recommend them. Here's how you string your guitar. Starting with the low E string, you'll pull it through the tailpiece and position it in place. Put the bridge back, take the string and pull it through the tuner hole. You want to keep tension on the tailpiece so it stays in place. Next, your right hand should be over the fingerboard and under the string at the 7th fret. Take the slack and wrap it once over the top. Bend the string so it's out of your way. You start winding in a counterclockwise motion. You'll repeat the rest of the 5 strings in exactly that same way. The A, put a little bend on the string. Be sure to guide the ball end right into the tailpiece. One hand over the 7th fret. Take the slack, wrap it once over the top, and bend the string up. Counterclockwise motion. Diodarios also have colored ball ends, so it's really easy to see which strings are which. Next is the D. Put a bend on it. Guide the ball end right up to the tailpiece. Take your hand over the 7th fret, grab the slack, wrap it once over the top, bend the string up. When stringing a guitar, the string should always wrap towards the inside of the peg head, similar to a flower. Feel free to put a couple more wraps on the G, B, and the high E strings. Over the 7th fret, grab the slack, once over the top, bend the string so it's out of your way. The B, put a little bend on it. Guide the ball end all the way up to the tailpiece. Put the string through the tuner hole. One hand over the 7th fret. Take the slack, wrap it once over the top, bend the string up. Make sure you're winding these strings downwards. Ball end all the way up to the tailpiece. Seventh fret, grab the slack once over the top, end it up. At this point, the guitar has 6 strings on it. Next, tune the guitar and clip the strings as close as possible to the tuning post. Most tuners will read a lot better if you roll the tone off and turn the volume up on your neck pickup. Playing the harmonic, the open harmonic, also helps a lot. Clip the strings as close as possible to the post. It's okay to go ahead and tune your instrument while it's flat on the table. Just be sure to put it in playing position when you're adjusting for intonation. Okay, it's time to check the position of the neck. Keep in mind, you can't read the neck without having the strings tuned to pitch. There are numerous methods for reading the neck. One method is to sight down from the peg head by holding the guitar from the back. A second method is to lay the guitar flat on the table with the neck hanging off and sighting it like that. The third method is the one I prefer. Use the strings as a guide to take your eyes out of the equation. Now I know what you're thinking. What am I looking for? You're trying to determine how straight the neck is, and most people don't know what to look for if they sight down the neck. So I prefer to let the strings tell me how straight the neck is. If you rely on your eyes to sight the neck, you won't get the most accurate reading, and there's room for error. So I use the strings as a straight edge to tell me how straight the neck is. Here's how. First, hold the high E string down on the first fret with your index finger, and the same string on the 14th fret with your pinky. If you can't find the 14th fret just yet, you'll have to count your way up. Then use the index finger on your right hand to tap the high E string over the 7th fret to see how much relief or lack thereof you have in your neck. Repeat the process on the low E string. The optimal neck relief is 4 to 7 thousandths relief, or about the thickness of a slim business card over the 7th fret. To give you a better idea, a single sheet of printer paper is 4 thousandths thick. I'm going to use digital calipers to measure them for you. And if you double it up, then a regular business card, which would be too thick. All right, I'm going to take a capo and put it over the 1st fret to take my left hand out of the equation. Hold down the 14th fret, take the piece of paper and place it over the fret and under the string on the high E. The piece of paper should be nice and loose, but still kept in place. That would be 4/1000. Same thing on the low E string. Nice and loose, but would hold it in place. If there's relief on one side of the neck, but not on the other, that would indicate a twist in your neck. That could be a problem, and you might need a professional to look at your guitar. You'll use the truss rod to make adjustments to the relief. Under the cover here is where you'll find the truss rod access. An adjustable truss rod is present on most electric guitars, which allows the guitar to accept a wide variety of string gauges. The truss rod also adjusts to compensate for expansion or contraction in the neckwood due to humidity or temperature change. Use the Phillips head screwdriver to take the truss rod cover off. Place it aside. Turning the truss rod clockwise will tighten it, counteracting the tension of the strings and straightening the neck or creating back bow. Turning the truss rod counterclockwise will loosening it, allowing the string tension to act on the neck and creating relief. Whether you want to add or take away relief, you will make these adjustments in quarter turn increments. For a Les Paul, you will use a 5/16 hex tool to adjust the truss rod. Tune the guitar to pitch and then check the relief again. Did you get it right the first time? Probably not. Keep repeating the process of adjusting the truss rod, tuning the guitar, and checking the neck until you have the optimal 4 to 7/1000 of relief. When you have the optimal relief, put the truss rod cover back on. Next, we'll move on to adjusting the action by the bridge. Let's talk about the action for a minute before we make any adjustments. Action is the distance between the frets and the strings. Low action is less distance between the frets and the strings, and high action is more distance. Why do we adjust the action? Action is preference-based. Many people prefer low action, but if the action is too low, the notes will buzz. And if the action is too high over the frets, your guitar becomes difficult to play. Now, to understand action, each string rests on 2 points: the nut and the saddle that sits inside the bridge. The bridge, unlike the nut, has the ability to move up or down to suit a player's preference of action. Because the radius of the fingerboard matches the radius of the bridge, it's easy to adjust the action by measuring the 2 E strings and using the thumb wheels to move the bridge up or down. Let's start with those who prefer low action. Hold down the high E string on the 1st fret and measure the distance between the 12th fret and the string with a ruler. The measurement on the high E should be 3/64 of an inch. Use the thumb wheels to go up or down. Then measure the distance on the low E string on the bass side. The measurement we're looking for there should be 1/16 of an inch. If you have these measurements on your guitar, you have low action. If that's too low, you can raise the action on each side in small increments to suit your playing style or preference. Remember, what you do on one side, you should do on the other. After adjusting the action, you will check the nut height. To check the nut height, start with holding down the high E string on the 3rd fret and tapping over the 1st fret. Repeat the process on the B, the G, the D, the A, and the E. There must be space between the string and the 1st fret for the nut to be functional. You'll want the string as close as possible to the 1st fret without touching it. Now, adjusting the nut slot is a very sensitive job and will require specialty nut files. Most guitar manufacturers complete their guitars with nut slots on the tall side. I recommend leaving it alone. If the slot is too low and the string buzzes open, or you go up in string gauge by more than one size, have it looked at by a professional. Next, the pickup height will be adjusted by holding down the 2 E strings on the last fret and measuring the distance between the pickups and the string. The measurement should be around 1/16 of an inch. The 2 screws on either side of the pickup will adjust the height. Be sure to measure both pickups. The final adjustment we need to make on your Les Paul pertains to the intonation. Intonation is the accuracy of the notes that repeat throughout the neck on varying strings. To better understand intonation, let's talk about the scale length. The scale length is the total distance between the nut and the saddle. The halfway point is the 12th fret. To accommodate for varying sizes of strings in action, the intonation has to be adjusted by elongating or shortening the scale length. Here's how to check the intonation. The guitar must be in playing position for accuracy. Start with the high E string. Tune the string open and then check the note to the fretted 12th. The string played open must match the 12th fret note. If the note is sharp, you will move the saddle backwards towards the back of the bridge to elongate the scale length. If the note is flat, you'll move the saddle forward to shorten the scale length. Check the tuning on the fretted note after each half-turn adjustment on the intonation screws. It's a little sharp. We'll go ahead and move the saddle back. It's a little sharp as well. After the process of intonation is complete, stretch the strings out one at a time. Tune to pitch. Then the setup is complete. Be sure to wipe down the guitar and strings after every time you play or practice. And remember, a well set up guitar will sound and play much better and is more likely to be played. So it's worth your time to go through this process. The Stratocaster made its debut in 1954. It was and still is played by some of the world's most notable guitarists like Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan. Today it's considered a classic in electric guitars. Every guitar setup occurs in the same order. You'll begin with the maintenance and care. Take off the old strings, clean and condition the fingerboard, then clean and polish the body. After restringing the guitar, you'll make the necessary adjustments to the neck. Next, you'll make any adjustments to the bridge and the saddles, the nut height, and finally adjust the pickup height and intonation if necessary. It's always in that order. There are different ways of adjusting individual guitars, but the order is always the same. So when beginning a setup for your Strat, here are the tools you'll need. For a tuner, I recommend the Peterson tuner for the best accuracy in tuning your guitar. It will work for an electric or acoustic guitars. You'll need a fingerboard conditioner along with steel wool. You'll need a guitar polish along with a polishing cloth. A peg winder. Three or a 6-inch ruler with 30 seconds and 64th increments. Precision flathead screwdriver and precision Phillips head screwdrivers. An 1/8-inch Allen key along with a .05 Allen key. Large Phillips head screwdriver for vintage or reissue necks. A small adjustable wrench. and small diagonal cutters. Okay, to start a setup, we must first remove the back plate, which is held on by 6 Phillips head screws. You don't have to take the back plate off, but you can get the strings out a lot easier with the back plate not there. Then, you'll slack the strings from the tuning keys. Remember, these are the tuning keys right here. Alright. When the strings are completely slacked, you should clip them in the center. Be sure to hold both ends so they don't spring back and scratch the guitar. Then, remove them from the tuners. And the bridge. It's a good idea to push the strings through the top. You'll see exactly where it comes out from the back. When you get the strings removed from your guitar, we'll start tightening all the components on the instrument. We'll start with the tuners and finish with the pots if needed. By tightening the components of the tuning keys, you'll avoid any unwanted vibration, and by tightening the pots, you'll avoid any future electrical problems. So grab your small wrench and start tuning. Start tightening your tuners. If your pots are loose, to get the knobs off, tear your rag, slip it underneath, and pull up. Go ahead and tighten up the pot. Put the knob back on. When the guitar's components are tight and the strings are off, we'll tend to the fingerboard with fingerboard conditioner and 4-0 grade steel wool. For fingerboards with maple or with finish, use a shield to protect the finish while you clean the fret with the wool. You can make a shield with masking tape. Probably a good idea to take your shirt and detack the tape so it doesn't harm your finish. Place the masking tape on either side of the fret. Take the steel wool and clean each fret one by one in an up and down motion. It's very important. Take the masking tape and move it down. And go ahead and repeat the process for all the frets. For this guitar, you'll only use fingerboard conditioner and steel wool because it's rosewood fingerboard. You'll spread the conditioner with the steel wool over the whole fingerboard. Clean the frets with an up and down motion. Again, that's very important. When you're finished cleaning and polishing the fingerboard, it's best to use a paper towel to clean up the excess oil and steel wool fibers. Be sure to wipe down the fingerboard down thoroughly so no oil or fibers are left behind. Okay, next you'll clean the guitar body with a good polish and a new clean cloth. You'll want to use a decent guitar polish in the $5 to $7 price range. Big Ben's is a great brand to use and I highly recommend their guitar polish. The odds are the more you pay for a polish, the better quality it is. I'll clean the body now so you get the idea. All right, in front of me sits a clean instrument free of debris. It is now time for me to put strings on it. String preference is important, not only in gauge but also in brand. I've been using Diodarios for years and I highly recommend them. Here's how you string your guitar. Fender Strats have 3 different types of tuning keys. You may have a vintage or reissue tuning key where the string is inserted through the top and then wound down. You may have a standard tuning key or you may have a locking tuning key. I'll show you how to restring all 3 guitars. The first part of the process is the same for all 3 types of Strats. Start with the low E string and slide it through the topmost hole in the back. Once it's through, pull it out in the front. Repeat the process with the rest of the 5 strings. Through the hole, pull it out, through the front. The D. The Adarios are also great because they have color-coded ball ends. The B. And then the high E string. If you have a vintage or reissued Strat, you will need to clip the strings before inserting them into the post. Start with the low E string. Take the string, put it all the way up to the tuner post, and place one hand over the 7th fret, over the fingerboard and under the string. Take the string, clip it. Insert the string into the top of the tuner post and start winding downwards. Now the A. Up to the tuner, one hand over the 7th fret, clip the string, place it in the tuner hole, you can wrap it once over the top, and start winding in a counterclockwise motion. D string, one hand over the 7th fret, clip the string, insert into the top of the tuner. You can wrap it once over the top, start winding downwards. The G string, one hand over the 7th fret, clip the string, insert into the top of the tuner post, start winding downwards. The B, one hand over the 7th fret, grab the string, start winding in a counterclockwise motion, going down. The high E string, 7th fret, one hand, you could wrap it once over the top, start tuning downwards. Tune the guitar. Most tuners will read really well when you play the harmonic on the 12th fret. Also, neck pickup with the tone rolled all the way off and the volume turned all the way up. For those with a standard tuning key, the stringing process is the same for the Gibson Les Paul. Take the low E string, put it through the tuner hole. Take your hand, place it over the 7th fret underneath the string, grab the slack, wrap it once over the top, bend the other end of the string up, and start winding downwards in a counterclockwise motion. Take the A, put it through the tuner hole, take your hand over the 7th fret, take the slack, wrap it once over the top of the post, bend the string upwards, start wrapping downwards in a counterclockwise motion. The D string, one hand over the 7th fret, take the slack, wrap it once over the top, bend the end of the string up, counterclockwise, going downwards. The G string, one hand over the 7th fret, take the slack, once over the top, bend the string upwards so it's out of your way, start winding downwards. The B string, one hand over the 7th fret, take the slack, once over the top of the post, start winding downwards. And the high E string, put it through the tuner hole, one hand over the 7th fret, grab the slack, once around the top of the post, start winding downwards. Tune the guitar to pitch and clip the strings. Clip the strings, close as possible to the post. And finally, those of you with a locking tuning key will insert the string through the hole and pull tightly. Start with the low E string. Pull the string all the way through the hole. Start tuning. Once you see the string grab, start tuning. Tighten the wheel on the back. And it's that simple. Put it through the tuning hole. Pull it tightly. Start tuning it. Once it grabs, lock the wheel on the back, and bend it up. The D string, put the string through the hole, pull it tightly. Start turning the tuner until you see it start pulling. Lock the tuner. The G string. Pull it all the way through. Hold it nice and tight. Start turning the tuning key. Once you see it start pulling, tighten the wheel, bend the string up. Do the same with the B string. Put it through the hole. Start turning the tuning key. Once it starts turning, lock the wheel on the back. And the high E string. Pull the string all the way through. Start turning the tuning key. Once it grabs, lock the wheel. Keep in mind, there should be no full wraps around the tuning keys, the post itself. At this point, the guitar has 6 strings on it. Tune the guitar and clip the strings as close as possible to the tuning post. Keep in mind, it's okay to tune the guitar while it's flat on the table. The only time it's not a good idea is when you're checking for intonation. Okay, it's time to check the position of the neck. Keep in mind, you can't read the neck without having the strings tuned to pitch. There are numerous methods for reading the neck. One method is to sight down from the peg head by holding the guitar from the back. A second method is to lay the guitar flat on the table with the neck hanging off. The third method is the one that I prefer. Use the strings as a guide to take your eyes out of the equation. Now I know what you're thinking. What am I looking for? You're trying to determine how straight the neck is, and most people don't know what to look for if they sight down the neck. So, I prefer to let the strings tell me how straight the neck is. If you rely on your eyes to sight the neck, you won't get the most accurate reading and there's room for error. So, I use the strings as a straight edge to tell me how straight the neck is. Here's how. First, hold down the high E string on the first fret with your left hand index finger, and the same string on the 14th fret with the pinky of your right hand. You'll just have to count to the 14th fret if you can't find it by sight yet. Then use the index finger on your right hand to tap the high E string over the 7th fret to see how much relief or lack thereof you have in your neck. Do the same for the low E string. The optimal neck relief is 4 to 7 thousandths relief, or about the thickness of a slim business card over the 7th fret. To give you a better idea, a single sheet of printer paper is 4 thousandths thick. I'm going to use digital calipers so you guys can see. I'll double it up. Now a business card, which is going to be a little too thick. I'm going to take my left hand out with the capo. Hold the 14th fret down, take the piece of paper, and slide it between the string and the 7th fret. The string should hold the paper in place if you have the right amount of neck relief. If there's relief on one side of the neck but not on the other, that would indicate a twist in your neck. That could be a problem, and you might need a professional to look at your guitar. You'll use the truss rod to make adjustments to the relief. An adjustable truss rod is present on most electric guitars, which allows the guitars to accept a wide variety of string gauges. The truss rod adjusts to compensate for expansion or contraction in the neck wood due to humidity or temperature change. Turning the truss rod clockwise will tighten it, counteracting the tension of the strings and straightening the neck or creating back bow. Turning the truss rod counterclockwise will loosen it, allowing the string tension to act on the neck and creating relief. Whether you want to add or take away relief, you will make these adjustments in quarter-turn increments. Let's go ahead and check the relief. For the vintage or reissued Strat, you'll use a large Phillips head screwdriver to adjust the truss rod. After reading the neck and determining whether to tighten or loosen the rod, slack the strings and either use a capo or a polishing cloth to tie off the strings at the 1st fret. Remove the 4 screws that hold the neck to the body. Take the back plate off. If the neck is in the pocket tightly, take it out slowly. Okay. Then make the adjustments to the truss rod and put the neck back on. Put the back plate on. Put the screws back in. Tune the guitar to pitch and check relief again. Did you get it right the first time? Probably not. Keep repeating the process of adjusting the truss rod, tuning the guitar, and checking the relief until you have the optimal 4 to 7 thousandths of relief. In the future, because you have to remove the neck on a vintage or reissued Strat to adjust the truss rod, I usually measure the neck relief before removing the old strings. These measurements taken will allow me to make the correct adjustments while I have the strings off the guitar. To avoid a guessing game that will result in taking the neck off numerous times, I determine how much relief is in the neck and if I need to make any adjustments. Let's talk about action for a minute before we make any adjustments. Action is the distance between the frets and the strings. Low action is less distance between the frets and the strings, and high action is more distance. Why do we need to adjust action? Action is based on preference. Many people prefer low action, but if the action is too low, the notes will buzz. And if the action is too high over the frets, your guitar becomes difficult to play. Now, to understand action, each string rests on 2 points, the nut and the saddle that sits inside the bridge. The bridge, unlike the nut, has the ability to move up or down to suit a player's preference of action. On a Strat, there are 2 preferences in setting your tremolo. The tremolo is the bridge on your Strat. One preference is to have the tremolo functional, and the other is to stabilize it firmly against the body. If you stabilize the tremolo against the body, you'll have more sustain and stay in tune better. Some people like the sound of the tremolo though. Let's start with those who want a functional tremolo. I like to have about a 1/16 of an inch distance between the tremolo and the body. To create this gap, adjust the claw screws, which are located right here. If you tighten the screws, the tremolo goes down, and if you loosen the screws, it moves up. After every adjustment to the tremolo, tune the guitar to pitch. To stabilize the tremolo against the body, either tighten the claw screws or add a spring until it doesn't move. Tune the guitar again. Now that the tremolo is set, you can adjust the saddles for the action. Let's start with those who prefer low action. On a modern Strat, hold the high E string down on the 1st fret and measure the distance between the 12th fret and the string with a ruler. The measurement should be 3/64 of an inch. Use the 0.05 Allen key to adjust the height. Then measure the distance on the low E string on the bass side. The measurement for the low E should be a 1/16 of an inch. Every string in between the 2 E strings is a gradual rise, so you'll need to adjust each string individually and fit the other strings in between the high E and the low E to follow the radius of the fingerboard. If you have these measurements on the guitar, you have low action. On a vintage or reissued Strat, because the radius is closer to 7 1/4, the action has to be taller in order not to lose the note when the string is bent. Hold down the high E string on the 1st fret and then measure the distance between the 12th fret and the string with a ruler. The measurement on the high E should be a 1/16 of an inch.